I'm Rich Cavallaro. I am the president and CEO of Skanska USA Civil. I'm responsible for the civil infrastructure business and mechanical power business here in the U.S. Here's a great example. If you had Manhattan and you put a 30-foot concrete wall around the entire island, and we had another event like Superstorm Sandy, we would avert a disaster in Manhattan. Unfortunately, that water goes somewhere. We would bury Queens, Long Island, New Jersey. So it is not practical to actually do that. So the real question is, what is resiliency then? Resiliency to me is to manage the event in the way to create the least amount of damage as possible, and then find a way to get back in service as quick as possible. And you need to do that in incremental ways, and we'll talk a little bit further about that. So just talk about some of these. This was Katrina, right? What did Katrina cost? Katrina cost us $170 billion in disaster relief. We're really good at relief. We're really bad at avoidance. On top of that, 2,000 people passed away. I mean, I don't think we talk enough about that in some of these things. I mean, what's the value of life? This is the tsunami in Japan in 2011. $300 billion this cost. I mean, this is 40-foot cargo containers thrown around like Legos. And again, 16,000 people passed away as part of that. And this one is near and dear to my heart. I'm a New Yorker, based in New York. This happens to be the open trench to Ground Zero World Trade Center. This is the water during Sandy came up over West Street and just poured into the basement. We had 165 million gallons of water in the basement of the new World Trade Center. Interestingly enough, it sounds like a horrible thing, and I'll tell you why it wasn't, but not yet. This is just one of those things you have to show. It's one of these boats that got picked up and left on a set of tracks again. The boat was a Sandy victim. This is what I love. It's my kids. Because one of the things that came out of one of the ripple effects was there was no electricity for some people up to 3 weeks. There was no gas. And no electricity and no fuel. It's a really scary thing. I mean, I had no electricity for 10 days. That means no hot showers, no heat. It was cold. And this is me kicking my kids out of bed and getting them on the gas line. We went back to gas lines. Some of you are as old as I am in this room. And remember the gas lines of the 70s. You'd wait 3 and 4 hours. Why? Because gas stations had no power to get the fuel out of their tanks. And we couldn't get fuel to New York. And there was logistical reasons for that really ended up making no sense. If you lived in Connecticut, you could get fuel like that. Well, how could that be? It's an easy drive. So those are some of the challenges you have during a storm that it is so local. This is Manhattan dark. I mean, again, New York never been dark. City of lights, right? Again, there was no subway service. People could not get to work. It just stopped the economy cold. It's in horrific shape. American Society of Civil Engineers says we need $3.6 trillion worth of investment now in infrastructure by the year 2020. On top of that, we talk about hardening or kind of that event where that's that 30-foot wall I'm talking about. Quite honestly, we can't afford the 30-foot wall. We can't afford the infrastructure to repair the infrastructure we have, and I know Jeanette talked about that a lot, creating new revenue streams. So we have to find a way to avert disaster and do it in an incremental way, a way that we can afford. Great quote, the cost of inaction is way bigger than the cost of doing something. If you do nothing, the ultimate cost is significantly higher. So we have to have the wherewithal to put the upfront investment in. So these are some of the big solutions that, quite honestly, we can't afford. This is in Rotterdam. This is a sea gate that protects the city. This thing is twice as high, twice as long as the Eiffel Tower is high. It is operated once in 2007 and cost $620 million back in 1990. Can we really afford that? Again, we can't keep good state of repair on much of our infrastructure. This is an artist rendering. This is the Verrazano Bridge in New York. This is again a tide gate upstream. They estimate that at $6.5 billion. We're building a new Tappan Zee Bridge for $4 billion. Could we really afford that tide gate to sit there and be used once every few years or once every 10 years. Of course we can't. So we have to find what I would say incremental solutions or incremental costs that give us big benefit. This is the Midtown Tunnel or the Elizabeth River crossing in Virginia. It's between Portsmouth and Norfolk. We now operate this tunnel. This is the entrance. This tunnel had a tide gate that was put in many years ago, an 80-ton tide gate. So basically all you're seeing here is the gate comes down, seals the tunnel, the entrance fills up with water, event is over, get a few pumps, in a half a day, this tunnel's back in service. And that's what I'm talking about when we talk about incremental costs. And that cost of that tide gate was almost nothing when you compare it to the cost of building that tunnel. Those are the kind of things we need to focus on. This is one that's being tested. Essentially, it's a big airbag. In existing tunnels, they're looking for a solution for existing tunnels that do not have tide gates. Essentially, it's a big airbag that seals the tunnel in an event. Again, fairly inexpensive. There's another solution. So when water, this is a subway grate, believe it or not. For those of you know, usually they're flush. When the water rises in an event, usually it infiltrates the subway through the vent system. So to gain a couple more feet of height and they make it, the water rise a few more feet before it gets into the subway system. I mean, they had a little fun with this one, of course. I mean, they can be more or less, but again, the real purpose of this was to allow further rising of water before it actually got into the system. So this is another subway system. So why walk up to go down? Because that's what this does. But again, it's the same concept. You give yourself a few more feet of water height before you actually get water into the system. And these are all relatively small investments compared to some of the significant investments I talked about before. This is a hospital we're building in Louisiana, in New Orleans. It's the University Hospital. So these guys really thought it out. And I can tell you the changes they made here were, at best, a 5% incremental cost to this hospital. The first 17 feet of this hospital, the first floor and the such, basically is all non-critical space, administrative, things like that. So if they were ever to get another event, this hospital can operate with 17 feet of water under it. The emergency rooms are up a floor. You can see these two bridges right here. This is to get you up to that next level. All the mechanical electrical equipment is on the roof. It has a 7-day potable water supply. And again, all of that was a small cost, but that will, again, this goes back to being resilient. So if you have an event, you can continue to operate through the event and stay in service, and then obviously as the water recedes or you pump the water out, you're back in business. This was a huge ripple effect that we lived through. I mean, so much of our electrical infrastructure is in the air, unfortunately. So we have to address this. I mean, not having power for 3 weeks is almost unheard of, but that's what happened. I know it's unlikely or unreasonable to think we can go out there and start burying everything we own, because we can't. But we need to get started. I mean, we need to at least have a plan to do a piece every year, and over time we'll get this stuff hardened and underground. And I can tell you PSE&G in New Jersey has started a $3.9 billion program actually to do this, to raise their substations to higher ground and to get their wires below ground, quite the opposite. Unfortunately, so many of our power plants sit right along bodies of water because a lot of them were coal plants. You needed to get coal to them. They wanted to get the coal there by barge. So that's where they are. Again, needs to be addressed. A lot of our plants were taken out as the water rose. A more difficult problem, but as we replace the plants, we need to be cognizant of being able to be resilient and operate. This is the Crossrail system in the UK, and these guys really thought it out. They engineered into their system and into the new piece of the system things like tide gates, like elevated entrances, all the things I talked about, elevated tracks, watertight doors in the system, again, to be able to handle an event like that. And I love this approach. This actually is in Rotterdam. Basically, it's a parking garage. So, but what they use it for is when they know an event is coming, they clear the cars out. They basically funnel the water to this garage and let this garage fill up with water. And what it becomes is a sump or a holding cell. So whatever water goes in here doesn't go somewhere else and create damage. It's a concrete structure. There's not a whole lot in there. You're going to do very little damage to this structure, if any at all. You'd be prepared to pump it out pretty quickly when the event is over, and that becomes a resilient infrastructure. And as I mentioned before with the World Trade Center, although it wasn't the intended purpose, but the fact that that was an open excavation and it took so much water, so many buildings were saved that didn't get water. When 165 million went down in that basement, it didn't take the next building out and do real damage. So it's the same kind of concept. I mean, obviously, we didn't want to do that to the Trade Center, but this is also this is the perfect idea of resilient infrastructure. It doesn't cost a lot of money to do this. And in fact, another one of these is being planned in Washington, D.C., somewhere near National Mall. I think this is important too. This is basically creating natural infrastructure or artificial barrier islands. I mean, we all could use more green, so Manhattan could use a little more green. But creating these islands out into the harbor, what they do is they reduce the fierceness of the storms. They knock down the waves. There's ways they can get molded and shaped to do those things. Again, not a huge investment, but that'd minimize the impact to the city in an event. This is a good news story. I have to say the MTA in New York during Sandy did a very, very, very good job. And again, this is just planning, right? We obviously they knew the event was coming. They took all their equipment to high ground. They did not lose one train. They went into their system and all their signal equipment, which is electrically sensitive. They went and they removed all their signal equipment where they thought it would be impacted by water. The water came in, no stopping it, receded, pumped out, electrical signal equipment reinstalled, trains ready to go. In fact, they were ready to go before Con Ed could give them power. And that's just good planning. They did a very, very good job. The other thing that happened during Sandy, I would say we could do a better job in this, and one of the lessons learned. We happen to be working for the Port Authority at the World Trade Center site. So when the basement filled with water, get us pumps, get this basement dry, and we're a national contract or a global contract, but nationally we can reach out. We brought pumps, any kind of event like this. Resources are scarce. You can't find pumps anywhere close. They needed to be gas pumps. They couldn't be electric, of course. There was no power. So we went all over the country. We brought pumps in, and we got that basement dewarded in less than a week. But the question you had to ask yourself, was that really the right use of those resources? Was there some other facility that should have gotten those pumps before we pumped out the basement? I would say what we need to do a better job next time is all the agencies need to get together, and they need to get those resources, and they need to put them where it makes the most sense to get people back to work, to kids back to school, and then work through a priority list. Governor Cuomo commissioned the 2100 Commission essentially to look at some solutions for the future in terms of resiliency. So some of the things they suggest, which are good ideas, but it takes some courage. One is, should there be shared pools of hard-to-procure equipment, and it could be shared between several agencies, it could be shared between several cities. I mean, there's no reason that several cities couldn't put this equipment in a particular place, and God forbid an event comes, you can go get it. But the issue there is, that makes the most sense because it gets used so infrequently. So to make a big investment and let it sit there and collect dust is hard to do. Again, always focusing on the fact we don't have enough money to pay for what we need right now, but this needs to get addressed. We can't ignore it. Because if you just look at the few storms that I talked about, was over $500 billion in disaster relief. And could we have invested half of that up front and not seeing that back end number probably. Again, this is talked about institutional cooperation, as I just talked about. So there's no money, and we, many of us may have lived through Sandy or some other major natural disaster. Resolve fades. When designers put forth a design that takes some of this stuff into consideration, it's too expensive. The first thing they do is cut redundancy and resiliency. It's the first thing that comes out of a design. And again, not only was it over 500 billion, it was 18,000 deaths associated with these storms, many of which can be averted if we just spend a little bit more time planning and thinking about how to manage the event and minimize the damage, get back in service as quick as possible. One of the answers actually is P3. And why P3? Because we're doing, right now we are the concessionaire and contractor design builder for this Midtown Tunnel project. We took over an existing tunnel, which I showed you the picture of, that was Sandy, that was the picture right after the Superstorm Sandy. We're building 2 new tunnels, and we're rehabbing the existing tunnel. But when we had to bid this job, we have to design to build it, and operate it, and maintain it. So part of our calculation was not just the cheapest capital cost, we needed the cheapest overall cost, because we were basically saying we were saying we're going to maintain this thing for 58 years. So we spent more money up front in the capital cost because we believed it was going to give us a cheaper operation maintenance cost. And just some of the things we did that I would say on when you look at the entire project cost of $2.1 billion, the money we spent to make this system resilient was fairly insignificant. I mean, 5% or so. Just some of the things we did. The design life of the concrete, instead of 100 years, we made it 125, which makes the concrete very, very dense, so it holds water back. We designed it instead of the typical 100-year flood for 500-year flood, because it is in this tunnel is in one of the wettest places in, I think it's the wettest place east of the Mississippi. The approaches, we spent more money to make sure we made the approaches taller, so we could, again, buy some more water height before we actually infiltrated the tunnel. Of course, we put tide gates in and watertight doors. We improved the drainage. Again, all those things were fairly minimal in cost to build this tunnel, but at the end of the day, if we're not putting cars through that tunnel, we're not collecting revenue, and we're not recouping our investment that we made in this project. So it made sense for us, dollar for dollar. I'm not sure that that's getting done on the public side. So, just to wrap up, I mean, the reality is there's not enough money to go around. We have to find ways to be smarter. We can be smarter by making incremental investments instead of these exponential investments in the infrastructure. We can do a better job of managing the storm before it comes, a better job after it comes, and we can plan our cities in a way that we can channel these, it could be water, in most cases it's water, into places that we can minimize the damage to facilities. Thank you.